They mocked the broke professor in worn clothes browsing her own $1 million art exhibition, but when an international collector walked in and embraced her as the gallery's CEO, their world shattered in seconds. Watch these arrogant staff members go from calling security on a loiterer to begging for mercy as they realize the woman they humiliated for an hour owns the entire building. The identity reveal will give you chills, but the swift justice that follows, immediate firings, industry blacklisting, and a viral video that sparked nationwide reform, i.e. will restore your faith in accountability. This isn't just about karma hitting hard, it's about how one woman's quiet dignity under pressure exposed systemic discrimination and transformed an entire industry. Stay until the end to see how this moment of injustice became a blueprint for cultural change that's still inspiring leaders today. They thought she didn't belong in the world-class art gallery she built from nothing, but in just a few moments, their cruel assumptions would cost them everything they'd worked for. What started as a simple visit to check on her latest exhibition became the most talked-about moment in New York's art scene, proving that respect isn't about designer clothes or expensive accessories. Part of her clothes, it's about recognizing the humanity in every person who walks through your door. Meet Danielle Reeves, a 39-year-old woman whose quiet presence commanded attention in boardrooms across the globe, but today she looked like any other art enthusiast exploring Manhattan's gallery district. Dressed in a flowing bohemian skirt, worn leather boots, and a simple cream sweater that had seen better days, she carried herself with the understated confidence of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone. Her thick, natural hair was pulled back in a casual bun, and her only accessory was a weathered leather journal that she clutched like a treasured companion. But appearances can be devastatingly deceiving. This woman, who looked like she might teach art history at a small college or write poetry in coffee shops, was actually the founder and CEO of Reeves Collective, the most influential platform for underrepresented artists in the world. Over the past 15 years, she had discovered and elevated countless artists whose work now hung in museums from Paris to Tokyo. Her eye for talent was legendary, her business acumen was unmatched, and her commitment to changing the art world's exclusionary practices had made her both beloved and feared in equal measure. The gallery she was entering wasn't just any gallery, it was hers. The gleaming white walls, the perfectly positioned lighting, the carefully curated collection of emerging artists from around the globe, all of it existed because of her vision, her funding, and her relentless pursuit of artistic excellence. The current exhibition, Voices Unheard, featured 37 artists from underrepresented communities, each piece telling a story that had been ignored by the traditional art establishment for far too long. As Danielle stepped through the heavy glass doors into the pristine space, she felt the familiar rush of pride mixed with responsibility. The gallery hummed with the quiet energy of serious art appreciation, muted conversations, the soft click of heels on polished concrete floors, and the occasional whispered observation about a particularly striking piece. This was her world, her sanctuary, the physical manifestation of everything she believed about art's power to transform society. What she didn't expect was to become an unwitting test case for the very values she had worked so hard to instill in her organization. Unknown to the staff bustling around the gallery, Danielle was conducting what she privately called a culture check, an unannounced visit to see how her team treated visitors when they didn't recognize power or wealth. She had received troubling reports about certain staff members showing preferential treatment to obviously wealthy patrons while dismissing others who didn't fit their narrow definition of serious art buyers. The leather journal in her hands wasn't just a prop. It was her constant companion, filled with observations about art, notes about artists she wanted to support, and ideas for exhibitions that could change the world. Today, it would serve a different purpose entirely. Today, it would document whether the gallery she had built to celebrate inclusivity and respect had somehow become infected with the same elitist attitudes she had spent her career fighting against. As she approached the first piece in the exhibition, a stunning mixed-media work by a young artist from Detroit whose talent she had discovered in a community center, Danielle had no idea that the next hour would become a defining moment not just for her gallery, but for the entire art world. The quiet woman in modest clothes was about to remind everyone that true power doesn't announce itself with expensive accessories or designer labels. Sometimes it walks in wearing worn leather boots and carrying a journal full of dreams. If you've ever been judged by your appearance before anyone took the time to know your story, this video will resonate with your soul. Hit that like button to help us share stories about dignity and respect with people who need to hear them. Tell us in the comments about a time when someone underestimated you. Your experience matters and could inspire someone else to keep pushing forward despite the doubters. And please subscribe because we're just getting started with this incredible journey of justice and transformation. Together, we can make sure stories like Danielle's remind the world that every person deserves respect, regardless of how they look or what they wear. Right at that moment, as Danielle stood quietly admiring the Detroit artist's powerful work, she had no idea that her own employees were about to reveal the toxic attitudes that had been festering beneath the surface of her carefully cultivated gallery culture. What happened next would shatter her faith in the people she had trusted to carry out her mission of inclusivity and respect. The first blow came from behind, delivered in a voice dripping with disdain that cut through the gallery's sophisticated atmosphere like a knife. "Oh great, another one," muttered Jessica Chen, a 26-year-old gallery assistant who had been hired just 3 months earlier. Her words were meant to be whispered to her colleague, but in the acoustically perfect space, they carried further than she intended. "She's probably just here to warm up in the AC. Look at those clothes. This isn't a homeless shelter." The cruelty in those words was breathtaking. Here was a woman who worked in a space dedicated to celebrating diverse voices, yet she was judging a visitor based purely on her appearance. The irony was lost on Jessica, who continued her quiet commentary to anyone within earshot. "I bet she can't even afford the parking meter outside, let alone anything in here." Danielle felt the familiar sting of discrimination, but her response was measured and strategic. She opened her leather journal and began writing, her pen moving steadily across the page as she documented the time, the employee's description, and the exact words that had been used. This wasn't emotional reaction. This was evidence gathering from someone who understood that real change requires documentation, not just outrage. But the disrespect was just beginning. As Danielle moved to the next piece in the exhibition, a haunting sculpture by a young artist from the Bronx, she found herself face to face with Marcus Webb, the gallery director she had personally hired 8 months ago. Marcus had impressive credentials, a degree from a prestigious art school, and had interviewed beautifully about his commitment to inclusive practices. What he was about to reveal would prove that sometimes the most dangerous prejudice comes wrapped in professional credentials. "Excuse me, miss," Marcus said, his voice carrying the condescending tone of someone who believed he was doing her a favor by acknowledging her existence. "I'm going to need you to step back from the artwork and please don't touch the frame. We've had issues with theft before, and I can't have people handling the pieces." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus had just accused a woman of being a potential thief based solely on her appearance in a gallery that was supposed to celebrate the dignity of all people. The assumption was so blatant, so steeped in classist and racist stereotypes, that several other visitors actually turned to stare at the interaction. Danielle looked up from her journal, her expression calm, but her eyes blazing with the kind of controlled fury that comes from witnessing everything you've worked against. "I wasn't touching anything," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. "I was simply appreciating the artist's technique." This piece speaks to the resilience of communities that have been overlooked by institutions like this one. Her response revealed a depth of knowledge about art that should have given Marcus pause, but instead it seemed to irritate him further. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to keep your voice down. This is a serious exhibition for serious collectors and art professionals. If you're looking for community programs, there are other venues that might be more appropriate for your interests. The dismissal was complete and devastating. Marcus had just told the founder of the gallery that she didn't belong in her own space, that her interests weren't sophisticated enough for the exhibition she had personally curated. The moment was captured not just in Danielle's careful notes, but in the shocked expressions of nearby visitors who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. They thought she didn't belong. They were seconds away from losing everything. But the tragedy had not stopped yet. What Marcus thought would be a simple dismissal of an unwelcome visitor was about to become the foundation of a discrimination case that would destroy multiple careers and expose the toxic culture that had infected the very heart of Danielle's progressive gallery. The network of prejudice was larger and more coordinated than she could have imagined. Within minutes of Marcus's condescending lecture, a small group of staff members had gathered near the reception desk, their voices low, but their intent unmistakable. Jessica Chen, emboldened by her supervisor's obvious disdain for the inappropriate visitor, began leading what could only be described as a character assassination disguised as professional concern. I mean, seriously, look at her, Jessica whispered to two other gallery assistants, gesturing toward Danielle with barely concealed contempt. She's giving off major broke professor energy. That journal probably has her grocery list in it, not any serious art observations. Why is she even still here? The cruelty in her words was matched by the enthusiasm of her colleagues. Sarah Martinez, a recent art history graduate who had been working at the gallery for 6 months, joined the toxic chorus with her own observations. I've been watching her for 20 minutes, and she's just standing there writing in that ratty notebook. Real collectors don't take notes like they're studying for an exam. They know quality when they see it. But it was the third voice that truly revealed the depth of the problem. David Kim, the assistant curator who had been personally mentored by Danielle during his first year, added his own devastating commentary. Marcus is right to keep an eye on her. We can't have people like that thinking they can just wander in here and act like they belong. This is a professional space, not a public library. The betrayal was complete. David had been one of Danielle's success stories, a young curator from a working-class background who had shown immense promise and dedication. She had personally guided his career, helped him secure his position, and believed in his potential to help transform the art world. Now he was leading the charge to exclude someone based on the same prejudices that had once threatened his own opportunities. The network of discrimination extended beyond just cruel words. As Danielle continued her quiet tour of the exhibition, she noticed that her presence was being systematically monitored and controlled. When she approached a particularly expensive piece, a $50,000 painting by an emerging artist from Lagos, Marcus immediately appeared beside her, his body language clearly designed to intimidate. This piece requires special viewing permissions, he lied smoothly, though no such policy existed. I'm afraid general visitors can't get this close to our premium works. His fabrication was so blatant that even other visitors began to notice the differential treatment. The contrast became even more stark when an elderly white couple in expensive clothing approached the same piece moments later. Marcus's demeanor transformed instantly, his voice becoming warm and welcoming. "Oh, this is one of our crown jewels. Please feel free to examine it as closely as you'd like. The artist's technique is absolutely revolutionary." But perhaps the most heartbreaking moment came when a young intern named Maya Thompson approached Danielle with a bottle of water and a genuine smile. Maya was a 20-year-old student from a local art school, working at the gallery to gain experience in the field she loved. Her natural kindness and respect for all visitors was exactly what Danielle had hoped to cultivate in her gallery culture. "Would you like some water?" Maya asked softly, her voice carrying the warmth that had been absent from every other interaction. "It's really warm today, and I noticed you've been here for a while." Before Danielle could respond, Jessica's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Maya, She's not a buyer. Save the hospitality for the real guests. We need that water for the VIP reception later." The public humiliation of the intern was devastating. Maya's face flushed with embarrassment as she quickly retreated, her kindness crushed by the toxic hierarchy that had taken root in the gallery. The message was clear. Treating certain visitors with dignity was not just discouraged, it was actively punished. Through it all, Danielle's pen continued moving across the pages of her journal, documenting names, times, and exact quotes with the precision of someone building an airtight case. The evidence was mounting, and the reckoning was approaching faster than any of them could imagine. No one expected what happened next would transform a private moment of discrimination into a viral sensation that would shake the entire art world to its core. The staff members who had been content to whisper their prejudices in the shadows were about to make their hatred public, while unknowingly providing the evidence that would destroy their careers and expose the rot that had infected one of New York's most progressive galleries. The escalation began when Danielle approached a stunning piece that held special meaning for her, a mixed-media installation by a young artist named Kemi Okafor, whose work explored the intersection of African diaspora experiences and contemporary American identity. The piece was deeply personal to Danielle, as she had discovered Kemi's work in a small community gallery in Brooklyn and had personally fought to include it in this prestigious exhibition. Standing before the artwork, she felt the familiar rush of pride that came from knowing she had helped elevate a voice that deserved to be heard. "Excuse me," Danielle said politely, approaching Jessica Chen, who was standing nearby with her tablet, ostensibly monitoring the gallery floor. "I'm really moved by this piece. Could you tell me more about the artist's inspiration? I'm particularly interested in how they've used texture to convey the experience of cultural displacement." The question revealed a sophisticated understanding of art that should have immediately changed Jessica's perception of the woman she had been dismissing. Instead, it seemed to irritate her further. The young gallery assistant rolled her eyes so dramatically that other visitors couldn't help but notice, her expression a masterclass in condescension and professional incompetence. "Look, lady," Jessica said, her voice loud enough to carry across the gallery floor. "All of that information is available online. We have QR codes for a reason. Please don't waste our time with questions you can Google yourself. Some of us have real work to do." The dismissal was so blatantly unprofessional that several visitors actually stopped their conversations to stare at the interaction. This wasn't just poor customer service. This was active hostility towards someone whose only crime was asking an intelligent question about art. The irony was staggering, a gallery assistant refusing to discuss art with a visitor in an art gallery. But Danielle's response was what truly elevated the moment from simple rudeness to something approaching legend. Instead of reacting with anger or frustration, she simply smiled and opened her journal, writing down Jessica's exact words with the calm precision of someone who understood that documentation was more powerful than confrontation. "I see," she said quietly, her pen moving steadily across the page. "So your policy is to direct visitors to Google rather than engage with them about the artwork. That's certainly an interesting approach to gallery management." The subtle sarcasm in her tone was lost on Jessica, but not on the growing number of observers who were beginning to realize they were witnessing something significant. Among those observers was a young woman named Zara Hassan, a 28-year-old art blogger who had been quietly documenting the exhibition for her social media followers. What she was witnessing horrified her, and she made a decision that would change everything. Pulling out her phone, Zara began recording the interaction, her camera capturing not just the words but the body language, the facial expressions, and the complete picture of systematic discrimination in action. Her hands were shaking slightly as she held the phone, not from nervousness, but from the adrenaline of witnessing what she immediately recognized as a pivotal moment in the ongoing conversation about elitism and exclusion in the art world. "This is unbelievable," Zara whispered to herself, though her words were picked up by the phone's microphone. They're treating this woman like she doesn't have the right to be here in a gallery that's supposed to celebrate inclusive voices. The situation escalated further when Marcus Webb approached the growing crowd of observers, his face flushed with the kind of anger that comes from feeling like his authority is being challenged. He had noticed the increased attention around Danielle and had decided it was time to assert control over what he perceived as a disruptive situation. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the false authority of someone who believed his position gave him the right to intimidate visitors. "I'm going to need you to lower your voice and stop creating a disturbance. This is a serious cultural institution, and we can't have people disrupting the experience for our other guests." The accusation was so divorced from reality that even other visitors began exchanging shocked glances. Danielle had been nothing but respectful and quiet throughout the entire interaction, while the staff members had been the ones creating a scene with their increasingly hostile behavior. The gaslighting was so blatant that Zara actually zoomed in on Marcus's face, capturing the moment when discrimination tried to disguise itself as authority. "I understand your concerns," Danielle replied, her voice remaining calm despite the mounting absurdity of the situation. "But I haven't raised my voice or created any disturbance. I simply asked a question about the artwork and was told to Google it myself. I'm curious, is that really the standard of engagement you want to maintain in a gallery dedicated to celebrating diverse artistic voices?" Her question cut to the heart of the hypocrisy that was unfolding. Here was a gallery that claimed to champion inclusivity and respect, yet its staff was actively hostile toward a visitor who was demonstrating genuine interest in the art. The contradiction was so stark that even the most casual observers couldn't ignore it. That's when Marcus made the decision that would seal his fate. Pulling out his phone, he began dialing security while maintaining eye contact with Danielle, as if to demonstrate his power over the situation. "Yes, this is Marcus Webb at the Reeves Gallery. I need security to respond to a situation we have with a visitor who's becoming disruptive and may be loitering." The lie was so blatant, so obviously false to anyone who had witnessed the calm, respectful interaction, that several people in the gallery actually gasped audibly. Zara's camera captured every word of the fabricated security call, creating a record that would be impossible to deny or explain away. But the most devastating part of the escalation was yet to come. As Marcus continued his false security report, describing Danielle as aggressive and potentially unstable, the woman he was slandering continued writing in her journal, her expression serene despite the chaos surrounding her. She was documenting everything: the lies, the discrimination, the systematic failure of the institution she had built to live up to its stated values. The network of discrimination had revealed itself completely, and the evidence was mounting in ways that would soon prove catastrophic for everyone involved. What they didn't know was that their victim was about to become their judge, jury, and executioner. If you've ever been in a situation where you were treated like you didn't belong, this story will hit you right in the heart. Please hit that like button to help us share this powerful message with more people who need to see that dignity and respect should never be conditional on appearance or wealth. Drop a comment below if you've experienced discrimination in places that claim to value inclusivity. Your voice matters, and your story could help others feel less alone. And don't forget to subscribe, because what happens next will restore your faith in justice and prove that sometimes the most powerful response to hatred is quiet strength and strategic documentation. Right at that moment, as Marcus finished his fabricated security call and the toxic staff members stood smugly satisfied with their systematic humiliation of an innocent visitor, the universe was about to deliver a lesson in cosmic justice that would become legendary in New York's art world. The woman they had spent the last hour treating like a criminal was seconds away from revealing a truth so shocking that it would shatter their reality and transform their arrogance into pure terror. The catalyst for this earth-shattering revelation came through the gallery's pristine glass doors in the form of a distinguished gentleman in an impeccably tailored suit. Alessandro Moretti, one of Europe's most influential art collectors and a man whose acquisitions could make or break an artist's career, swept into the gallery with the kind of presence that immediately commanded attention. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his Italian leather shoes clicked authoritatively against the polished concrete floor, and his eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who had spent decades navigating the highest levels of the international art world. What happened next unfolded in slow motion, like a scene from a movie where destiny reveals itself with devastating clarity. Alessandro's eyes scanned the gallery until they found exactly what he was looking for, and his face immediately broke into a warm, genuine smile that transformed his entire demeanor. He began walking directly toward Danielle, his arms already opening in preparation for the greeting that would change everything. "Miss Reeves," Alessandro's voice carried across the gallery with the warmth of genuine friendship and deep professional respect. "There you are. I've been looking forward to this moment for months. Your latest curation is absolutely magnificent. The way you've woven together these diverse voices into a cohesive narrative about resilience and hope is nothing short of genius." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Every staff member within earshot froze mid-motion, their brains struggling to process what they had just heard. Miss Reeves? The name that was painted in elegant gold lettering on the gallery's front window? The name that appeared on their paychecks every month? The name that had become synonymous with revolutionary change in the art world? Jessica Chen's tablet slipped from her hands, clattering to the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the sudden silence. Her face went through a remarkable transformation, from smug satisfaction to confusion to dawning horror as the implications of what she was witnessing began to sink in. The woman she had been mocking for her broke professor energy was being embraced by one of the most powerful collectors in the world. Marcus Webb's face drained of all color as he watched the interaction unfold. The man who had just called security on a disruptive visitor was now witnessing that same visitor being treated with the kind of respect reserved for artistic royalty. His phone, which he had used to make his fabricated security report, trembled in his hand as he began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. But it was Danielle's response that truly sealed the moment in history. She accepted Alessandro's embrace with the gracious warmth of someone comfortable with genuine respect, her earlier composure now revealed as the natural confidence of someone who had never doubted her own worth, even in the face of systematic humiliation. "Alessandro, thank you for making the trip," Danielle said, her voice carrying the natural authority that had been hidden beneath her modest exterior. "I'm so glad you could see the exhibition in person. These artists deserve to have their work appreciated by collectors who understand the power of authentic voices." The conversation continued for several minutes, with Alessandro praising specific pieces and discussing potential acquisitions with the kind of sophisticated vocabulary that revealed deep knowledge and genuine passion for art. Every word was another nail in the coffin of the staff members' careers, each exchange making it increasingly clear that they had been systematically mistreating someone far more important than they could have imagined. But the true moment of revelation came when Danielle finally turned to address the staff members who had been watching the interaction with growing horror. The transformation was complete. The quiet, humble woman in modest clothes was now revealed as the powerhouse CEO whose vision had created the very space they were standing in. "Thank you all for the tour of my exhibition," Danielle said, her voice carrying a new weight that made everyone in the gallery unconsciously lean forward. The words were delivered with perfect calm, but they carried the force of a thunderclap. "I've learned quite a lot about how my staff treats visitors when they think no one important is watching." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just quiet, it was the kind of absolute stillness that occurs when reality shifts so dramatically that human brains need time to process the new information. The woman they had treated like a potential thief was the person who owned the building. The visitor they had tried to exclude was the visionary who had personally selected every piece of art surrounding them. Jessica's mouth opened and closed, soundlessly, like a fish gasping for air. The assistant who had lectured about real work was now face to face with the person whose real work had created her job in the first place. Sarah Martinez began backing away from the group, as if distance might somehow protect her from the consequences of her participation in the discrimination. David Kim, the assistant curator who had been personally mentored by Danielle, looked like he was going to be physically sick. The betrayal was complete and devastating, Batty. He had violated the trust of someone who had believed in his potential and invested in his future. The weight of his words about people like that, not belonging in a professional space, was now crushing him with its cruel irony. But it was Marcus who seemed most devastated by the revelation. The gallery director, who had fabricated a security report about an aggressive visitor, was now staring at the woman who had hired him, promoted him, and trusted him to uphold the values of inclusivity and respect that defined the gallery's mission. His carefully constructed professional facade was crumbling in real time as he realized that every word he had spoken, every assumption he had made, had been witnessed by the person whose opinion mattered most. "Now," Danielle continued, her voice still calm but carrying an unmistakable note of steel, "I'd like to speak with my staff about what I've observed today. And I believe some of you may need to start thinking about your replacements." The reckoning had begun, and there would be no mercy for those who had shown none. What happened next would become the gold standard for how leaders should respond when discrimination is exposed in their own organizations, a masterclass in swift, decisive action that would be studied in business schools and shared in corporate boardrooms across the country. The staff members who had spent the afternoon systematically humiliating their own CEO were about to learn that actions have consequences, and that prejudice in any form would not be tolerated in the institution Danielle had built on principles of respect and equality. Danielle reached into her worn leather bag and pulled out her phone, but this wasn't a desperate call for help like Marcus had made earlier. This was a strategic communication from someone who understood that real change requires immediate, decisive action. The number she dialed belonged to Victoria Chen, her chief operating officer and closest confidant, a woman who had worked alongside Danielle for over 8 years and shared her unwavering commitment to creating spaces where all people could experience art with dignity. "Victoria, this is Danielle," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent gallery with the authority of someone who had just witnessed the complete failure of everything she had worked to build. "I'm at the downtown gallery, and I need you to implement Code 7 immediately. We have a discrimination situation that requires emergency intervention." The term Code 7 wasn't corporate jargon. It was a specific protocol that Danielle had established for situations involving serious violations of the gallery's core values. It meant that normal procedures were suspended, that immediate action was required, and that the full weight of the organization's leadership would be brought to bear on the situation. For the employees who had just revealed their true character, it was the sound of their careers ending in real time. Within minutes, the gallery's atmosphere had transformed from one of casual sophistication to one of intense corporate crisis management. Victoria's voice could be heard clearly through the phone speaker as she efficiently mobilized the resources needed to address the situation. "Danielle, I'm connecting you with legal and HR immediately. I'm also dispatching security from headquarters and preparing termination documentation. What's the scope of involvement?" 4 staff members engaged in systematic discrimination, Danielle replied, her voice steady but carrying the weight of profound disappointment. "I have detailed documentation of the incidents, witness testimony from visitors, and video evidence captured by a bystander. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was sustained, coordinated harassment based on my appearance and perceived social status." The words systematic discrimination and video evidence seemed to echo through the gallery like a death sentence. These weren't just workplace infractions or policy violations. These were potential civil rights violations that could result in lawsuits, federal investigations, and the complete destruction of professional reputations. The 4 employees who had been so confident in their prejudices just minutes before were now facing the obliteration of everything they had worked for. Jessica Chin had begun hyperventilating, her earlier smugness replaced by panic as she realized the full scope of what she had done. The woman who had confidently dismissed visitors based on their appearance was now gasping for air as the reality of her situation hit her like a physical blow. Her tablet, still lying broken on the floor, seemed to symbolize the shattered remnants of her career. Marcus Webb was backing away from the group as if proximity to the situation might somehow make things worse. The man who had fabricated a security report about his own CEO was now watching his professional life crumble in real time. His expensive suit and polished shoes, which he had used to project authority and respectability, now seemed like a costume that could no longer hide the poverty of his character. Sarah Martinez had sunk into one of the gallery's minimalist chairs, her face buried in her hands as she whispered, "I'm so sorry," over and over again. The recent graduate who had joined the toxic chorus of discrimination was now confronting the reality that her art history degree couldn't protect her from the consequences of her prejudice. But it was David Kim's reaction that truly captured the devastating nature of what was unfolding. The assistant curator who had been personally mentored by Danielle was now standing frozen in place, his face a mask of horror, as he realized he had betrayed someone who had invested in his future and believed in his potential. The man who had spoken about people like that, not belonging in professional spaces, was now facing the end of his own professional aspirations. The next call came from the gallery's legal department, their voice crackling through the phone with the efficiency of crisis management professionals. "Miss Reeves, we're prepared to implement immediate protective measures. We have security en route and termination documentation ready for processing. Do you want the individuals involved escorted from the premises immediately?" Danielle looked around at the 4 employees who had humiliated her, her expression unreadable. This was her moment of ultimate power, the chance to destroy the careers of people who had treated her with such contempt. But what she said next revealed the true character of a leader who had built a revolutionary arts organization on principles rather than revenge. "Yes, but I want this handled professionally," she said, her voice carrying across the gallery for everyone to hear. "These individuals have made serious errors in judgment that cannot be tolerated, but they will be treated with the dignity they failed to show others. However, I want it clearly understood that discrimination in any form will result in immediate termination and industry blacklisting." The mercy in her response was remarkable, but the finality was absolute. Even after being systematically humiliated, even after watching her own employees reveal themselves to be everything she had worked against, Danielle was choosing to end their careers with professionalism rather than cruelty. But mercy didn't mean weakness, and within the hour, security personnel from the gallery's corporate headquarters had arrived. The irony was poetic. The same type of security that Marcus had tried to call on Danielle was now there to escort the discriminatory employees from the building they had tried to exclude her from entering. As the 4 former employees gathered their personal belongings under security escort, the gallery remained silent except for the sound of their footsteps on the polished concrete floor. Other visitors watched in stunned silence as 4 careers ended in real time, victims not of corporate downsizing or economic pressures, but of their own prejudice and hatred. The blacklist notices would follow within days, ensuring that their names would be shared throughout New York's art community as individuals who had violated the basic principles of respect and inclusion. In an industry built on reputation and relationships, it was a professional death sentence. The reckoning was swift, decisive, and complete. But this was only the beginning of a transformation that would extend far beyond 4 terminated employees and reshape how the art world thought about inclusion, respect, and accountability. But what came next proved that true leadership isn't just about delivering justice, it's about transforming moments of darkness into catalysts for lasting change that can inspire an entire industry to examine its own practices and commit to doing better. The 4 terminated employees had barely left the building when Danielle began implementing reforms that would not only heal the wounds they had inflicted but create a legacy of accountability that would revolutionize how cultural institutions approach inclusivity and respect. The transformation began almost immediately, sparked by Zahra Hassan's decision to share her video footage on social media. Within hours of the incident, the recording had exploded across every platform, accompanied by Zahra's passionate commentary about what she had witnessed. "I just watched a world-renowned CEO get humiliated in her own gallery by staff who judged her based on her clothes," she wrote. "This is what systemic discrimination looks like in spaces that claim to celebrate diversity. This is why representation behind the scenes matters just as much as representation on the walls." The hashtag Gallery Dignity began trending within 6 hours, as people shared their own experiences of being judged or excluded from cultural spaces based on their appearance, race, or perceived social status. The comments section became a powerful forum for stories that had been silenced for too long: tales of museum guards following black visitors, gallery staff assuming people of color were looking for the bathroom rather than the art, and the countless microaggressions that made cultural spaces feel unwelcoming to the very communities they claimed to serve. But Danielle's response to the viral moment was what truly set her apart as a leader. Instead of hiding from the negative publicity or trying to minimize the incident, she used the spotlight to address systemic issues that extended far beyond her own gallery. The statement she released that evening became a masterclass in accountability and vision. "Today I experienced firsthand how discrimination can infect even spaces that are explicitly designed to celebrate inclusion," she wrote. "But what happened to me happens to countless visitors every day in galleries, museums, and cultural institutions across the country. The difference is that most victims don't have the power to fight back, and most incidents don't get recorded. That changes now." The announcement that followed would reshape the cultural landscape. Danielle was launching the Gallery Dignity Program, a comprehensive initiative that would require every cultural institution receiving funding from the Reeves Collective to implement mandatory hospitality training, bias awareness education, and accountability measures designed to ensure that all visitors were treated with respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived social status. The program wasn't just about rules and regulations. It was about fundamentally changing how cultural institutions thought about their role in society. Every gallery, museum, and cultural center in the Reeves network would be required to establish visitor advocacy programs, where community members could report discriminatory treatment and see real consequences for staff who violated dignity standards. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of the program was its focus on systemic change rather than individual punishment. Danielle announced the creation of the Cultural Equity Task Force, bringing together artists, community leaders, and cultural workers to develop best practices for creating truly inclusive spaces. The task force would have real authority to investigate complaints, mandate changes, and even withdraw funding from institutions that failed to meet dignity standards. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. Within days of the program's announcement, other major cultural institutions began reaching out to learn how they could implement similar initiatives. The Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles announced they were reviewing their visitor services training. The Brooklyn Museum committed to hiring community liaisons to ensure their spaces remained welcoming to all visitors. Even the Metropolitan Museum of Art, one of the world's most prestigious cultural institutions, quietly began implementing new protocols for staff interactions with visitors. The stories that emerged in the wake of the viral video were both heartbreaking and inspiring. Artists who had been discouraged from visiting galleries because of past discriminatory experiences began sharing their stories. Community members who had felt excluded from cultural spaces started organizing visits to museums and galleries, armed with new confidence that their experiences would be taken seriously if problems arose. Maya Thompson, the young intern who had tried to offer Danielle water only to be shut down by her supervisors, became a powerful symbol of the change that was possible when good people were empowered to act with kindness. Danielle personally reached out to Maya, offering her a full scholarship to complete her art history degree and a guaranteed position in the gallery's new community engagement department. Maya represents everything we want to cultivate in the art world. Danielle explained during a press conference announcing the scholarship. She saw someone who appeared to need hospitality and offered it without judgment. That's the kind of instinct we need to nurture and protect in our cultural institutions. The intern's story became a viral moment of its own, inspiring other young people in the arts to speak up when they witnessed discriminatory treatment. Maya's courage in trying to help a stranger, even when discouraged by her supervisors, became a teaching moment about the power of individual action in creating systemic change. But the most remarkable outcome was the response from the broader art community. Artists who had experienced discrimination in galleries, museums, and cultural spaces began organizing to share their stories and demand accountability. The hashtag #ArtEquality became a rallying cry for a movement that extended far beyond a single incident in a single gallery. Gallery owners, museum directors, and cultural leaders found themselves facing uncomfortable questions about their own practices. How did they train their staff? What protocols existed for handling complaints about discriminatory treatment? How could they ensure that their commitment to diversity in their collections extended to diversity in their treatment of visitors? The conversation that emerged was difficult but necessary. For too long, cultural institutions had been able to celebrate diversity on their walls while ignoring discrimination in their daily operations. Danielle's experience had pulled back the curtain on practices that many had suspected, but few had been willing to confront directly. The Gallery Dignity program became a model that extended far beyond the art world. Retail establishments, restaurants, and service businesses began implementing similar training programs, recognizing that dignity and respect should be universal standards rather than privileges extended only to obviously wealthy or important customers. The transformation was complete, but it was also just beginning. What had started as a routine visit to check on gallery culture had become a watershed moment that would influence how cultural institutions operated for generations to come. What emerged from this extraordinary day would become more than just a viral moment of justice. It became a blueprint for how courage, dignity, and strategic leadership can transform an entire industry and inspire millions to demand better from the institutions that shape our cultural landscape. The lesson that resonated most powerfully was beautifully simple yet profoundly challenging. We don't judge artists by their price tags, and we shouldn't judge people by their appearance. 6 months later, the Gallery Dignity program had been implemented in over 200 cultural institutions across the country, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond the art world. Museums, theaters, and galleries that had once operated with implicit bias now had concrete protocols for ensuring every visitor felt welcome and respected. The 4 employees who had discriminated against Danielle had inadvertently sparked a revolution in how cultural spaces approached inclusion and accountability. Danielle's final speech at the exhibition's closing ceremony captured the transformative power of the moment perfectly. Art has always been about seeing the world differently, about recognizing beauty and value where others might see only the ordinary. Today, we've learned that the same principle applies to how we treat each other. Every person who walks through these doors carries stories, dreams, and perspectives that could change how we understand the world, if we have the wisdom to listen instead of the arrogance to judge. The closing image was powerful and symbolic. The toxic staff members' nameplates had been replaced with photos of the new team, led by Maya Thompson and other young professionals who understood that hospitality and respect weren't luxuries to be rationed based on appearance, but fundamental rights that belonged to every human being who entered their space. The message that echoed through cultural institutions worldwide was clear. Dignity isn't negotiable. Respect isn't conditional. And true leadership means creating spaces where everyone can experience the transformative power of art without fear of judgment or exclusion. Here's what most people don't understand about discrimination. It's not always about hatred. It's often about assumptions we make in split seconds that reveal more about our character than we'd like to admit. I've worked in cultural spaces for over a decade, and I can tell you that what happened to Danielle happens every single day in galleries, museums, and cultural institutions across America, just without the cameras rolling and without victims who have the power to fight back. But Danielle's story teaches us something profound about the power of quiet dignity under pressure. She could have exploded with righteous anger, stormed out in frustration, or used her power to humiliate her attackers. Instead, she chose the path of strategic documentation and transformative leadership. That's the difference between revenge and justice, between destroying individuals and rebuilding entire systems. Real change doesn't come from tearing people down. It comes from lifting everyone up while holding people accountable for their actions. The most powerful lesson here isn't about karma or comeuppance. It's about the choice we all face when confronted with injustice. We can be bystanders who enable discrimination through our silence, or we can be allies who document truth and demand better. Zahra Hassan proved that you don't need to be the CEO to make a difference. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one with the courage to press record and share what they've witnessed. What strikes me most about this story is how Danielle transformed her personal humiliation into systemic change that's still protecting people today. The Gallery Dignity program isn't just corporate policy. It's a recognition that cultural spaces have a responsibility to welcome everyone, regardless of how they look or what they wear. Art belongs to all of us, and the spaces that house it should reflect that truth. If this story opened your eyes to how discrimination hides in places that claim to celebrate diversity, if it reminded you that change is possible when people choose courage over comfort, then this channel is exactly where you need to be. Hit that like button to help us reach more people who need to hear these stories of accountability and transformation. Drop a comment sharing your own experiences with being judged by your appearance. Your voice matters and could inspire someone else to speak up when they witness injustice. And subscribe right now, because we're just getting started with stories that prove dignity isn't negotiable and respect isn't conditional. Together, we can make sure stories like Danielle's remind the world that every person deserves to experience beauty and culture without fear of judgment or exclusion.